For anybody who is not familiar with Jacob, the Ben Thompson of niche media is maybe the shortcut I would use to describe his newsletter, Media Operator. And Jacob writes really, I think, the best newsletter and some of the best content, produces some of the best content around niche media. And I should ask Jacob right now, do you say niche or niche?
I'm a niche media kind of person.
Okay, I'm going to say niche purely because that's how I used to say it before I was forced out of this habit. So he writes all about niche media, and everybody from the leadership team at The Hustle and Morning Brew and a bunch of other really fast-growing media companies reads his work. And today we're just going to kind of dive deep into the impact that the internet has had on the media biz and all the exciting opportunities that I think it opens up for kind of individual writers and creators. So we're going to talk about business models. We'll talk about just the opportunity and how to think about carving out your own niche media company. And I kind of wanted to start just getting some foundation laid for this conversation. Jacob, how would you kind of define niche media? What does that mean to you?
Sure. So niche media really is about picking a specific topic or group of people and understanding what is needed to serve that audience appropriately. So it's best to answer it with examples. Niche media can be thought of as, B2B publications are all niche media because they are serving a specific industry. So if you cover the biopharma space, you are a niche publication because you are serving people who work in biopharma. If you run a food site, like an example being Food 52, you are a niche site because you are targeting a specific audience that is interested in a very specific topic. If you are, I like to think of local media companies as niche media companies because, again, from a demographics perspective or a geographic perspective, you're talking about a specific group of people. It might be a little controversial, but I think of a newsletter like The Hustle or Morning Brew as a niche newsletter because psychographically, they're a very similar group of people, which psychographics is just, his audience profile is based on specific psychological, indicators, somebody who really cares about how, good fashion, excelling at their jobs and, at 3:00 on a Wednesday, listening to some guy in New York talk about media, so that in my opinion is really niche media, versus mass media, which is just, one publication that just tries to blurt out information about everything. It doesn't really serve anybody very well.
So one thing, there's a bunch that I want to zoom in on with that definition, kind of the landscape of niche media. But another kind of macro thing I was curious about is like, what is different about maybe what are the most important differences about media today versus maybe 5 or 10 years ago? Kind of how has the landscape changed and evolved over the last kind of decade or so?
Sure. So over the past decade, a decade ago, the only types of companies that were getting written about were those companies that were raising tens of millions of dollars. We're talking about the BuzzFeeds, the Vices, the Voxes, the Refinery 29s, all of those companies that sold a narrative that media could scale. And even as recent as a couple of years ago, that was still a narrative that people believed, right? There's a reason that Vice, I think, has like a $5 billion valuation, though I think that some companies have written that down, is because investors believed that media companies, if given enough resources, could scale and then compete with the major platforms like Facebook and Google. Now, everyone accepts that reality is just that's not a reality. And that today, I think that what we're starting to see is a proliferation of smaller niche media companies that admittedly have always been there, right? Like I talked to a guy on my podcast last week who launched a media company 13 years ago about mobile health news, right? It was a small team, but that's a niche company. At the same time, BuzzFeed's raising money, he's launching a niche company. So that's always been a thing, but I think now what we're going to find is that these major players, The Athletic being the exception, really just don't have access to capital anymore and therefore have no choice but to try to become profitable versus a lot of these niche companies that have always been profitable.
Yeah, so what to you is kind of why don't these cast a wide net, like broader large plays work, and what's kind of driving maybe the movement towards more niche media?
Well, the real issue is they just don't have a clearly defined audience. So when you launch a niche publication, so let's use a media operator as an example, I'm very clear about who my audience is, right? I'm talking about people who are either running their own media companies or who are responsible for specific functions within that media company. So audience development, sales, biz dev. I don't touch too much actually on the editorial side, but I do from time to time. Product. It's a very clearly defined audience. If I asked you who's the audience for BuzzFeed, what would you say? You couldn't tell me. Now look, you can get to that point, right? Like the New York Times, I don't think has a clearly defined audience, right? But the New York Times is like 140 years old. It's built a strong enough brand that it can support that sort of a play. Whereas, these younger companies, they don't have anyone to serve. And so, the way I like to think about it is if you try to be everything to everyone, you'll do nothing great for anyone. And that's what they're all doing. And that's why they all continue to this day struggle. And, they'll say COVID's the reason that they're struggling now and all of that. And, never let a, good crisis go, unused. So they'll let go of a lot of people to try to write their businesses and all that. But the reality is they were never going to be successful.
So that's a perfect segue into what I think a lot of people are thinking about right now, which is like, maybe I know a lot about a handful of industries. Maybe I've been in a specific career for a while. How would you encourage people to identify a niche that's actually worth kind of launching media around and really investing the time to create great writing around, great content around? Just curious how you'd encourage people to think about picking a niche that's worth investing in.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're tackling it from a business perspective, like I work in industry X, therefore I want to cover industry X, there are a lot of niches that work, right? Like there are, I would be ecstatic if a decade from now we're celebrating there being thousands of these niche publications out there. Because, there's the economy is huge, right? So if we're talking about a professional perspective, then there's a lot of opportunity. Then there's the other side of it, which is more the entertainment side. And there also exists tremendous opportunity there. Part of what informs the size of your niche is really how you are going to monetize it. So if you're going to chase an advertising play, right? And you can see this with Morning Brew, if they're starting to enter niches with their newsletter strategy. But if you notice, all those niches are still very large niches. It's marketing, it's emerging tech, it's retail, right? Those are large niches versus, if we look at a very, if we look at, like these paid newsletters, they can get much more specific because you don't need that many people to sign up to earn a good income. There's, one example, and I can't remember the name of it. I always forget it. There's a agricultural technology newsletter out there that does, I want to say it does 7 figures in revenue every year, right? Like who would even think to launch a publication with yes, Van Trump report. Thanks, Ari. Like who would even think to launch that kind of publication? But like it earns a ridiculous amount of money. So, if there are 5,000 people in your niche, right, there's a decent opportunity there to build something, but your price point is then dependent. Like the amount you charge for something like that depends on how focused you get. But I think there are too many opportunities out there. It's not hard. On the subscription side, on the advertising side, you need to have a large enough audience. So that's a bit harder. So there I would talk about, you're looking at people, hopefully audience sizes in the tens to hundreds of thousands.
So I'm curious, with a media operator, did you consciously kind of run that equation of how big is this market of folks who run and operate media companies? I'm curious how you thought about kind of launching and starting to monetize your own media company.
No, I launched a media operator on a Friday night, and I decided I wanted to launch a media operator that Friday morning. So I put no thought into it whatsoever. I just decided I was going to do it. Substack was ridiculously easy to set up, and therefore I just did it, right? And that was it. I put no thought into it. I wrote my first piece. I sent it out. I shared it. That was it. It was after that fact that I then paused and went, okay, I did this. How big could this audience be? I don't really know what my TAM is, but I know that there are thousands of media companies out there, if not tens of thousands, if not larger, right? Ones that actually would want to read what I have to say. So yeah, I didn't do that analysis. I was kind of impulsive.
Well, now you can articulate it well, though. So that's actually, I think a lot of people probably share that same like intrinsic drive to just write about the stuff that they're passionate about and interested in. One thing that you said before the call that I thought was pretty interesting is like, paid subscription is frankly maybe go as far as like maybe a little bit overdone or overblown, and that there are a hell of a lot of ways to monetize an audience of maybe any size or certainly a growing size. So I'm curious, how would you think about encouraging people to think about like monetization, right? Like what kind of business model makes sense for what specific topic and approach?
Sure. So look, everyone loves the subscription because it's monthly recurring revenue, right? I love logging into my Stripe account and seeing the MRR and knowing how much I'm bringing in and seeing the growth and all that. And it's relatively predictable, as long as you keep your churn rate down and all of that. So, subscriptions, I understand why everyone loves them and all of that. But there is $200 billion a year spent in digital advertising every year, right? And yeah, in the United States only. And Facebook and Google capture a disproportionate amount of that. And surprisingly, Amazon is the third largest ad network out there, or ad seller out there, which you would never even think about. But it's true. So yes, again, the major platforms steal that. But advertising, if done correctly, and specifically with email, it's the perfect conduit for this. Advertising can be a strong product when you're dealing with niche, because what you have is a specific group of people that companies potentially want to target. So if you run a newsletter about, I don't know, biopharma, right? And you are, you might be a company, your advertising base might be a company that services that industry, right? That sells services to biopharma companies. You might be a contract manufacturer that can help, spin out the COVID vaccine when that happens. So if you've got the right people on your list, advertising is a great play. Maybe you should do an entire business around events. Not right now with COVID, but virtual events where you pull together like this right here, right? It's a great opportunity for people. You could probably charge $25 a person for this. Get 20, 30 people in. You're making, it's not a ton of money to start off with, but as time goes on, it starts to grow. The best value, or the best, outcome of you writing on a regular basis is people see how you think about something. If they like how you think, maybe they'll hire you for consulting. So I understand why everyone loves subscriptions. I love subscriptions. I turn subscriptions on a media operator, but there are plenty of different ways to monetize your publication. And it's important to think about your publication and think about, is there a deep enough advertising base? Is my audience specific enough? What other opportunities exist? And also, let's just be real, do more than one, right? I have a paid subscription. I will sell advertising in my newsletter. Why wouldn't I, right? Perhaps one day I'll do consulting. Why wouldn't I? There's no reason, that you have to rely on a single stream of revenue to do everything. It's not necessary.
Yes, I'm really curious. I was going to zoom in there a bit because you are actually doing this, right? You actually have skin in the game. And we talked a little bit about like there is kind of high level theory and strategy and that's all really well and good. But often like the tactics and the actual like doing of this stuff can be fairly challenging. So I'm kind of curious how your own thinking has evolved around monetizing a media operator. When you started off, was it just like people will buy this and expense it and like, well, just go all subscription? And how have you over the last 12 months thought about like, okay, what's the real value I'm providing here and how can I best, monetize it?
Yeah. So, most when I started a media operator, I really thought that, okay, this is cool. Like, this is an opportunity for me to meet people, right? I really just wanted to meet people. Then I was like, all right, if I can provide, I started getting feedback from people, and they kept saying, wow, this is really deep. This is good tactical information. This helps my media business. Started having phone calls with people. It's like, all right, I solved that first use case of what I hope to achieve. And then I went, all right, if I'm offering one good piece of information to somebody, maybe I will start charging for this, and then, again, to go back to my whole, I'm kind of impulsive. I was going to charge $100 a year. And then at the last second, I hit 2 rather than 1. And then now charge $200 a year. I did no research to determine if that was the right thing or not. Just kind of went, I want 200 instead. And, the logic there being, if I give one good piece of information to somebody, it's worth $200. But as time goes on, as I've continued to move down this road of building a media operator, I have thought there are various levels to the audience, right? So if you think about it as just a strict funnel, up top you got your free audience, and this might be an audience that isn't even yours. It's Twitter's audience, right? And we as much as as much as legacy media companies like to say their followers on Twitter are their audience, that's not true. That's Twitter's audience that you're borrowing. So you've got up top, you got the free audience. You get them to convert to a free newsletter. This is my audience development funnel. Well, how do you monetize that layer of the business? Well, the way I'm looking to monetize that layer is through advertising, right? I'm going to, hopefully I can, it'll take some time, but hopefully I can start to drive do some biz dev and actually get some advertisers there. You then go a level down. Well, now you're at the premium newsletter. That's $200, right? And if I go another level down, perhaps that's where it's a tight community of, say, only 100 or 200 media operators that are each spending $1,000. And, or it's an event that I do after COVID, again, where I'm charging a ticket is $1,000, say, or $500, and I've got a couple sponsors, but that right there is a 6-figure event. And then you go a level deeper, right? And perhaps I'm advising media startups. Now I've got some skin in the game with those companies. Or I do what our friend Packy did and launch a syndicate. And I invest in some of these companies. I have a philosophy about investing in media companies, so we could talk about that maybe later. Or I do consulting, right? And so as I think more and more about what the business model of a media operator is, it's really just following the audience. And as it gets smaller and smaller down that funnel, offering higher and higher priced opportunities for the audience to engage. And therefore, that's really just another way of saying that they get more and more access to me.
Yeah, and that was actually that's a perfect segue into the how should I position myself question. Because I think for you, at least from the outside, it seems very clear, right? Hey, I'm literally a media operator. I am trying to make my own media business successful, and this is something that you're thinking deeply about and actually doing. And so, what better partner or thinker to have on my side? I'm curious, just broadly speaking, though, how you would encourage people to think about defining their own positioning in a market. If I want to write about product management, and maybe I want to make that my thing, where do I go from there? What's kind of the next set of questions I should be asking myself to get really specific with what I'm doing?
Sure. So, from a professional perspective, there are 2 ways to write. At least this is how I visualize it. People might have other ways. You either pick an industry that you want to write on, and you write about that industry. I write about media, and I touch on audience development and and monetization and licensing and events, and it kind of runs the gamut. And most importantly, I touch on product because I have been pretty heavily involved in product. The other side of it is to think about it from a job function perspective, right? So if we compare the two, so I write about an industry. Lenny, right, who I never can say his last name, so I'm not even going to try. But Lenny's newsletter, he focuses on product management, right? And talking about things that product managers really care about. They're both great ways to kind of go forward, right? I prefer the industry side of things just because, it's just how I like to think about things. I like to think about multiple aspects of a specific business. But, if you're a product manager, think about what industry with what industry you do product management in. So if you are a product manager in the logistics field, then write about logistics. Write about logistics with a slant towards product, but don't take it one step farther and try to write strictly for logistics product managers, because you want the marketers to reach you at these logistics companies. You want the salespeople to reach you at these logistics companies. And most importantly, you want the CEOs to read you at these logistics companies, because if they're reading you, even if like you're not, even though you're not writing about marketing or sales, you're writing about it through the lens of product, they're still interested because it's their industry. And their industry is logistics, and they need to understand the industry. And so that then introduces you to a slightly larger audience to work with. Or you can take it the route that Lenny does, which is you serve a specific job function, but I'm not sure how large the logistics product manager job function is versus the product manager, and how much differentiation there is between a logistics product manager and a software product manager and a biopharma product manager. Is there such a difference in how they product manage that it warrants 3 separate publications? I don't know.
Yeah, I know the Van Trump being a good thought experiment of how specific can you go and still be successful. So another thing we talked a little bit about is around like basically like, okay, I picked my niche to some extent. I kind of know how I'll position myself. I think another thing that a lot of people are working through on the call, and certainly this is something that's come up a lot in Compound, is like, what the heck should I write? Do I have enough credibility to write commentary and opinion? Should I write more tactical how-tos? How do you think about like maximizing the value you provide to your readers, even once you've kind of defined what the heck the topic is?
Yeah. So, the way I think about this is I have a wicked strong imposter syndrome, where I just doubt that anyone's ever going to actually want to read what I have to write. So I only really wanted to launch a media operator because I've been doing this for years now, right? I've done that. And I just don't respect armchair generals or armchair analysts or whatever you want to call it. The people who sit on the sideline and lob grenades and try to offer commentary without actually understanding the inner workings of things just doesn't, I don't respect that. Yeah, cool. You get it right from time to time, but you don't know what you're talking about. When it comes to earning credibility, I believe everyone should write for 2 reasons. One, it's a great way to learn. And so even if you don't know something a ton, write about it and put your thoughts forward, because you will learn, right? And if you're open to feedback, people will come to you. And the second reason is it demonstrates to other people your way of thinking. And so, that is also very helpful, for some people who use these newsletters as a way to find jobs. Like, that's the best resume, so being willing to learn publicly is a great thing. So while I don't respect as much, especially people who try to build a huge business on it, I don't respect people who just do armchair analysis and don't actually dive in deep. I think everyone should write publicly and, start from something that a little bit, right? So if you are a product manager in logistics, then start there and start writing about it and start writing about the things that you've learned. And if you see something, offer commentary around it. If you see a logistics company launch a product, offer commentary. And as time goes on, you will get better at that, right? Which is like, writing is an exercise. And also, people will start to respect you. And then that just becomes a flywheel, right? Where now suddenly people are talking to you more, so you're learning from them. Like, a guy reached out to me who, used to work at a media company. I've written about that media company. And he offered, he told me some of the inner workings of what I had written about. And it kind of gave me a different perspective on things that I would never have had if I was not willing to learn publicly. And that's really all writing is when you do a newsletter, is you're learning about something publicly.
Yeah, I think Drew just said it perfectly in the chat. Best way to learn is to say something wrong on the internet. Someone will inevitably correct you.
But the problem with that is, there are some people, and I won't drop names, but like there was one guy who was tweeting yesterday about media. He doesn't know the first thing about media, but he's so large at this point that even if people throw shade at him, he just doesn't care. because he's a large personality. And sure, he gets it wrong sometimes, but who cares? Because I'm a big personality and I have another 500 hot points I'm going to make over the next year. And that's it. And, and we go from there. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. We can,
Right. Don't burn your credibility. In other words,
right.
It seems like maybe particularly relevant for a niche where the people reading your stuff do know a lot about the thing you write about, and it's probably easier to burn yourself there. By the way, we've got a minute or two before we switch to Q&A, so everyone on the call just hit the chat button and type in whatever you're curious about. We have some questions that were submitted beforehand, but definitely want to get to anything that came up as we spoke. So just one kind of final question I had before we jump into the Q&A around your output is that you're pretty prolific. Like, you are able to reliably produce, I think, a lot of useful content just on a pretty much every other day. And I'm just curious how you do that. Like, because I think a lot of people, they've got the day job, they've got consulting gigs. Mm-hmm. Just curious to hear a little bit more about how you're able to consistently just put your ideas out there and not blow it.
Yeah. So, look, I'm a bit of a masochist in that I have a day job and then I decided to do this at night. So my process is I write down story ideas in a Notion file, right? I like Notion; it works for me. I forget that I wrote those story ideas down, and then I write Monday nights and Thursday nights. So my newsletter therefore comes out Tuesday mornings and Friday mornings. So on a Thursday night, it'll get to be about 7:30, 8 o'clock, and I will be like, well, it's time to write. And so I will come up with a topic, write the topic, and edit the newsletter before I go to bed at about 11:30, 12 o'clock. The next morning, I go through a quick copy edit. My girlfriend is a great copy editor, so she cleans it up for me, and then I publish. That is not the right way to do content creation. It's certainly not the way that I think most of your writers, in your community do it. The peer-reviewed editing process, which, if I could write any other way, I would love. I need that pressure beating down on me to get it done. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it. I'm hoping at some point to be able to plan ahead and actually write ahead of time and form deeper thoughts. But right now, my process is I am a stream of thought writer. I happen to be a pretty clean writer, so I'm fortunate there. And that's kind of how it works.
Amazing. Well, it segues perfectly into the first question that we had submitted beforehand. And like I said, if anybody has any questions you want to bring up now, you can dump them in the chat. Make sure it sends to everyone. So one question that the group had was like, hey, I have a full-time job. Like, maybe I don't do terribly well under pressure. Like, do you, in your opinion, do you have to go full-time on your writing and content to make it kind of work? Or can you make this kind of a side project that can still meaningfully grow? I'm just curious to hear how you think about like that trade-off of risk reward.
Sure. Look, I think having a day job actually makes you better at this, especially if what you're writing about is related to what you do during your day job. So like by day, I work at a media company, right? I'm in charge of digital revenue at a media company. So I think about on a daily basis how to grow that business. That gives me things to think about and therefore write about when I write at night. So, I don't write about my day job, but just things I learned doing my job turn into things that I then want to write about. So I actually think that people should keep their day job. The way that I've kind of done my newsletter is my Tuesday newsletter is a reaction to news, right? And I offer my commentary on that. And so for me, that's not a very, intense exercise, right? I'm reacting to something, which, we all are reactor. We're all very good at reacting to things. It's harder not to react in many cases. And then my Friday piece is more of a deep dive into a specific topic, either from a strategic perspective or many times a tactical perspective. These you can write ahead of time, write those on the weekends, give yourself time to edit it, go through the peer review exercise that you have with your community. Don't quit your job to do this. If you get to the point where you're earning a solid income from it, then sure, quit your job. But like, I haven't quit my job. I'm not, that this makes me better at my job versus not having it, because it helps me work through ideas I have. And as I'm writing, I can go, this is actually a horrible idea. Like, I'll never do this.
Do you expect kind of independent niche media to grow from here? Like the kind of Substack thesis of everybody has their own kind of one-person media company. And is that part of why you feel this is a worthwhile area or industry to cover?
The answer is not both yes or no. As with most things in life, there's a bit of a gray area. I believe there's plenty of opportunity for a variety of niches out there. Again, I'm super bullish on niche media. I do not subscribe to the belief that it's just going to be a bunch of solo people doing this. I have a lot of, I believe that media companies have a purpose, right? And I believe that 1 + 1 can equal 3 with a media company. I believe that you can leverage people's expertise that you don't get in a solo operation. And that goes beyond just having editing resources and graphic resources and human resources and legal resources and all that. That becomes, a group of people can create better things than an individual person can. I do believe that a lot of people will go the route of solo operations. But what will likely happen is a lot of these individuals will start solo, and then they'll want to grow, and then they'll start to hire people. And the next thing you know, 3-4 years down the line, suddenly they've got a media company of 10, 15 people, right? They've hired someone who's an event expert to handle the logistics of the events. They've hired a salesperson to go do the business development to get group subscriptions. Right? They've hired 2 or 3 more writers because, they've got their niche, but there's an adjacent niche that they also want to cover. So rather than doing that niche, let's find another writer and let's get the audience blend, right? And we talk about bundles and things like that. This started on, yes, as an individual thing, and I think a lot of people are going to do that. But I imagine as time goes on, the individual today will just be a new niche media company tomorrow. So that's why I launched a media operator, because I think that there'll be so many more of these, and therefore they'll all hopefully become paying subscribers to my newsletter.
Totally a bet on a trend that is clearly, especially in the last 12 months, just been unrelenting.
Yep.
Cool. So I think, Drew, if you're able to unmute, you're welcome to ask your question around the actual language media operator. Otherwise, I will MC it. Cool. No sweat. Cool. So yeah, this is just a straightforward question. Can you explain what media operator, what that term actually means?
Sure. So media operator is an individual who is responsible for running, their media business, right? So when I think about an operator, it's not just the writing side of things. It's really the people behind the scenes who are doing audience development, who are doing sales, who are doing all those things. So that's how I think about it. As a media operator, the technical term would really be like an owner operator. So someone who owns their business and is running it. But I kind of expand it to really just mean, the people on the business side who are responsible for a lot of the functions that go into running a media business.
Wonderful. So, Andres, feel free to unmute and ask about Substack if you're able to. Otherwise, I will officially switch to MC. Cool. So I'll just go ahead and do it. So do you think that Substack is kind of the best platform to get started and host a niche media publication?
Sorry, you broke up. Is that you're asking if Substack is the best way to launch one of these publications?
Yep, and the best place to launch and host one of these niche publications.
That's a loaded question because I use Substack. The short answer is Substack is great for the speed in which you can do things. Substack is great for not having to support any of your technology, and it works, right? But Substack is a very specific type of business. If you are going to only build a subscription newsletter, Substack's for you, right? And you feel comfortable giving up 10% of your business. The unfortunate reality for Substack is that there are other platforms, like Ghost and things like that, where like there's a guy who will spin up a Ghost site for you for $80, and then your hosting's $5 a month, and then you don't have to give up 10%. And Ghost looks almost identical to Substack. But if your goal is to just be a niche subscription newsletter, Substack's fine. The exception to that rule is I don't believe anybody should build a website on a subdomain. So, the fact that Substack does require you to be like subdomain.substack.com it should be a non-starter for everybody. And I wish more creators would push back on Substack for that, just because it's just like that's just not good from an SEO perspective and things like that. If you want to build more than a niche subscription newsletter, if you want to start to do advertising, and I don't mean like banner ads, I just mean like sponsorships the way that Morning Brew does, you're going to want to have more workflow. You're going to want better analytics. If you want to run events at some point or like spin up pages like this and embed forms and all that, you need to go with something more custom. But Ghost does more of that, right? So like that's why Ghost has gotten so much respect over the past month or 2 months as people start realizing it is like it gives you all that other functionality. You can drop HTML in and things like that you couldn't do with Substack. And
just a clarifying question, that is primarily, the domain issue is primarily an SEO, like foregone SEO is the main.
Yeah, look, I don't know who came up with the phrase, but it's basically, the phrase is called digital sharecropping, where you effectively are borrowing someone else's land to build your business. And anytime you borrow someone else's land, you're a renter, and the landlord is going to want their rent at some point. Facebook did this to people, right? Facebook said, build your group on Facebook. So people went, okay, I'll build my group. This is awesome. Then Facebook said, spend money to build your group faster, right? Okay, I'll do that. I'll spend money to build my group faster because then I can, do audience development. And then Facebook said, pay us to market to your group. Otherwise, your group's never going to hear from you. Well, if you built your business on Facebook, you're screwed. So it's the same thing with when you build on any platform, there comes a time when they can do that to you. So if you build on a subdomain, you run the risk of, if you ever want to leave, you need to start from scratch from an SEO perspective. And I'm starting to accrue more and more traffic from Google. That's because people are searching for specific keywords and I'm starting to rank. So therefore, like if I ever leave Substack, I own my domain name. It's very easy to set up the exact same URL structure, and therefore I'm safe. Like I'm not stuck. So I choose to stay at Substack right now versus like being trapped to stay at Substack.
Wonderful. So Patrick had a question around bundles. So what are your kind of thoughts on writers bundling their work? Is that, an effective way to kind of counter the subscription fatigue? Is that the future of how a lot of these writers are going to get their work read? Just curious broadly on your opinions on bundling.
So bundles. So if we think about the bundle, right, the New York Times is a bundle. And what the New York Times did is it bundled together 1,600 different journalists under $115.99 or $17.99, depending on how long you've been a subscriber, monthly subscription. That's a bundle. And the reason they did that is because, the idea is the research shows that anyone who is willing to pay for news is likely only willing to pay for 1.1 subscriptions. So, okay, what does that mean? If I have a subscription to the New York Times, it's unlikely I'm going to have a subscription to any other news entity. Now, that's why I didn't launch a news publication. That's why I launched an analysis publication, because I don't fall into that trap. Bundles, The Athletic is also a bundle, right? They decided to pull together all sports writers about a specific, sport or anything, and get them all together, one flat fee, that works. So yes, bundles do work. Here's the caveat to that, and here's why I don't think that most of these writers bundling together are really going to make sense. There's two problems. The first is if your topics are too broad and you start to bundle, what you will find is that users are still sticking to one specific piece of content. So, because it's content they really care about. The second issue is that you're going to have some who are better than others. And it turns into this really interesting and difficult economics game where you now have to track, and it's a great research report. I don't remember the name of it, but the way to handle subscription fatigue, or the way to handle payouts on a bundle, is based on propensity to unsubscribe and who keeps you from unsubscribing from a content perspective. That's the person that should get the most money. But I it really depends on the topics. Now, if if let's say you write about genetic engineering and somebody else writes about cancer and somebody else writes about virology, and then the three of you go, listen, let's get together and let's launch a publication, or let's merge our three newsletters together. If those three topics are close enough, then yeah, that's a brilliant bundle. Because now what you do is you say to all the people who are paying each of you, listen, your rate's not going to change, but now you get all three of these publications, right? So yeah, you're far less likely to unsubscribe. So that will definitely help with churn. And then it also helps with new audience development, because now you're not saying I've got to have 3 subscriptions. You're saying you get 1 subscription, you get everything. So it really depends on how you're bundling. Just throwing a bunch of random newsletters together, unless they're psychographically related, which we talked about that before, that bundle is going to be very tricky.
Oh, that's great context. I'm just an aside on that. Subscription fatigue. Do you think that's going to be a real issue kind of a year or two from now or already? Or is that just it's only happening to the people on Twitter?
I don't think subscription fatigue is a thing yet. I thought it was. I really did. I thought it was going to be a thing. But then, really what you said is true. Like, we live in a bubble on Twitter where, yes, there are people who have 25 Substacks, and yeah, that's insane. But, the reality is, I think only 1 or 2 of the people on Substack right now earn more than $1 million, if that. So if that's the case, then you're really talking about a tiny, these are tiny companies from a revenue perspective, and the audience sizes are huge out there. The internet, it is hard to fathom just how large the internet is. But that's also why I'm a big fan of B2B media, because when you throw something on a corporate card, which you can do with B2B media, fatigue is not a thing. I got a subscription to Digiday. I don't read it every day, right? I have it through my corporate card, and it just renews, and I just expense it because, for me, $400 is that's a lot of money. For my corporation, if I get one good piece of information at $400, it's that then helps the business earn hundreds of thousands of dollars. They don't, that's a rounding error.
Great caveat. Cool. So I think, Ari, you can go ahead and unmute if you're able to and ask your question.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Cool. Hey, Jay.
What's up, Ari?
Question for you. So how do, a lot of these one-person media companies are popping up, and their differentiation is their brand and their writing, right? But, companies like 2PM and Web, they've added these other differentiators, they have he has his indexes and his data plays. How do you think the future is for a lot of these Substack writers as they try to add other differentiators besides writing? What do you think that flywheel looks like? And how are you thinking about, even for yourself, those differentiators besides just yourself in the writing to create that mode?
Sure. I mean, part of being a creator-driven business is really just around access. Webb's business is, he's got his paid, I think it's $150 or $200, similar to me. That's his newsletter. But then he's got his Polymathic, which is a much tighter community where he spends much more time with people. And so, that's fine. Now, and this might not answer your question, so, qualify after, but I would caution people to be careful about leaning too heavily into themselves versus a larger brand, because I don't ever get to retire now, right? If I built a media business around an industry I cared about, I don't know, I work in crypto. So let's say I launched a business around crypto, and I launched a crypto media business, and I hired journalists, and I'm the CEO, I own all the equity, but I'm not the face of it. And then I go to sell it. Well, I'm selling it based on earnings, or I'm selling it based on a multiple of EBITDA. And if I then leave, it's okay because the brand exists. Versus if someone came along to buy a media operator, it's all contingent on my ability to continue running a media operator. So, that's something that really people need to take into consideration. The exception to that rule is Barstool Sports, and they did a fantastic job pivoting from Dave Portnoy being the only thing that mattered to just having so many individuals that mattered that became the brand. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, no, that definitely answered the question. I am curious, and if you're not comfortable sharing it, no worries. Are you thinking about like ways to expand outside of like making media operator more not just about you, that there is a succession plan? And if you don't want to answer, no worries.
Yeah, I mean, not right now. I'm 31 years old, so I've got a long plan for how I grow in the media business. But I can say that if ever there comes a time that I do decide to launch a traditional news organization, it will not be like I will be 100% behind the scenes. Specifically because of that understanding of like, I want to build something where 1 + 1 = 3, and not where Jacob has to leverage all of Jacob to succeed. But I mean, a media operator, the honest truth is I would have done it for free because I love writing about media. It just so happened people told me I should charge, and therefore I did. And now I've got people who pay me, yourself included. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the answer.
Awesome. Great question. So I'm going to read Max's question, calling all the way from Germany. He might get the geography award. So we touched on this a bit in a couple parts, but what are your views on bundling and adjacent services like legal, marketing, all the kind of maybe even editing, like the periphery services for niche media and newsletters? Like, how do you imagine that kind of evolving for maybe the folks who don't have the revenue yet to get some of that support? How do you imagine them kind of getting the help they need to build a business?
Building a business is one of two things. It's either sweat equity or cash, or cash investment, right? So, or it's sweat or cash. That's really all you've got to work with. Substack has started introducing things like their legal support fund for journalists who, want to hold power to account and therefore they might get sued. If anyone is trying to get into that business, understand that the billionaire's favorite weapon is the lawsuit. They don't expect to win. They expect to terrify you to back down. So, there's certainly something there regarding, those services. Look, the reality is, when you're first starting out and you don't have a ton of money, like, this is why your community works out really well. Like, an editor is expensive. So how can you get around that cost? Well, I'll edit your work if you edit my work, right? If you're a great graphic designer and I'm a great, something different, right? I'll help you with what I'm good at if you help me with what you're good at, right? So like that, I think that relationship, that barter system kind of plays in. But at the end of the day, this stuff costs money. Like if you're really trying to build this into a business, you're going to have to pay, or Substack continues introducing these other features, and those other features, they continue to accrue that 10%, if not more. I don't know how they're going to do that. But this again goes back to why I think that media companies have lasting power is they offer all those functions. And the most important function that they offer that no one talks about is audience development. It is the hardest part about this business, right? It's not hard to write. Everyone's got thoughts. Like some of us have more thoughts than we know what to do with. But the hardest thing to do is figure out how to get people to read your stuff. And the reality is people spend too much time thinking about content and not enough time about that. They need to spend a lot more time thinking about how to get people to read it and a lot less time thinking about how to make content.
Wonderful. So I think, Lizzie, you are up next, and you're welcome to unmute if you're able to.
Hey, Jacob. Thanks so much for all the info today. I had some questions about picking your brain on kind of how do you come up with the best topics. I totally get, coming up with your ideas through your day-to-day job, but then how do you even filter that down to another level that says, okay, here's my idea and here's what I want to share, but how can I position this so it's, of the utmost value to my readers, and I'm not just kind of either sharing an opinion or retelling a story that, we could kind of find somewhere else?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is don't be afraid of sharing your opinion. The fact that you are starting, like if you are like a solo creator, part of the reason that people are reading you is because they want to know what you have to say about a specific topic. So, there is something to be said about, like, I am certainly not unopinionated in my writing. I'm sometimes borderline hostile to some of these media companies that just do horribly terrible things. And I don't mean that like they're evil. I just mean that they make dumb decisions, and I say that. So that's to comment on your last part of your question. To answer your actual question, how do I come up with ideas? Part of it is just the pressure of the day. As I get to later and later in the night, and I realize I have to have something go out the next morning. That helps me. But also, reacting to things is a good way to kind of get you started. So if you are reading something and it gives you a reaction, pause and think about what that reaction is about. And if it's because you disagree with their approach, okay, well, what was the approach that you would do instead? And that's then a topic. And then if you can start to dive deeper into how you would do that approach to whatever that is, that then allows you to kind of work out a full piece. And yeah, it is, how would I do this? So when I talk about, one of the pieces that I had that I thought was not a great piece just because I thought it was too tactical, but actually one of the largest investors in media emailed me afterwards. He said, this is one of the best pieces you wrote. I wrote a piece about analytics and how to really break down your analytics and understand the right things for you to be tracking in your business. And the reason I came up with that is because during, my day job that week, I happened to be spending a lot of my time working through our analytics and working through what matters and what doesn't, and having conversations because we were going through budgets and things like that. And that then is where you can kind of extract seeds of ideas. And then, from that topic, I looked at that and went, all right, well, where am I getting all this traffic? I did that analysis, and what I found was Google is driving a lot of traffic because Google drives a ton of traffic for everyone. What's the second idea? Well, how can I get more traffic from Google? And here are some ways to do keyword research. So, just as you're going through your life, you can kind of, especially if you're writing about your day job, you can kind of come up with ideas to kind of give you a place to start.
That's wonderful.
Thanks.
Awesome. Great question. So I think we've got time for one more. And Drew, I'm just going to read your question out. So this is actually something I'm really curious to hear Jacob's answer to. So do you think it's possible to charge for articles? It's like charge money for a standalone article. It seems like people only pay for books or subscriptions, but not individual articles, even though there's plenty of books that are basically just, articles with a bunch of fluff. Curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of books are just articles with fluff. So I am so against microtransactions. It's not even funny. I think I wrote a piece about this, and this is one of the ones where, to Lizzie's question, I was hardcore aggressive about the fact that microtransactions are a horrible idea, and can we please let this be a topic that dies? So I'll temper that hostility in my answer. So yes, I agree. The whole pay for everything, pay for a book, even though it's just an article, all that. Yes, it does suck, but there are economics that are in play when trying to do pay per article that just don't work. So if you're going to use your credit card paying per article, let's say it's a 50-cent article, right? I'm losing 32 cents of that, or 35 cents or 30 cents, whatever, to Stripe's credit card processing fee before the percentage. So it's 30 cents plus 2.5% or 3%, which means I'm losing, 31.5 cents. Okay, so now all I'm making really is like 18 cents for an article versus the 50 cents that you paid. All right, well then let's take it one step farther. Let's use Patrick suggesting that Substack could do pay per article easily by adding to both subscriber and publisher accounts at the end of the month. Okay, that kind of works. But then what you have to then do is fund a wallet, right? I don't mean a crypto wallet for the, I just mean you need to put your credit card into a wallet. And then it's an exercise of, I land on an article and it says, okay, do you want to read this? Yes, I do want to read this. Click here to pay 50 cents for this article. All right, that's interesting, except now what you're doing is you're asking the user to make a decision every time they come to an article. That doesn't work because there's a psychology that goes into paying for something, right? And the more steps you put in front of somebody to read a piece of content, the less likely they're going to act. So Perhaps the person comes, they see that 50 cent and go, you know what, never mind. And then they leave, right? Because they don't want to act. The 50 cents is a big number in their mind, even if it's not that much. It's just like the act of paying for that article means you have to quantify each individual article, And then the third way would just be like you fund your wallet, and you then can see all the content, and it's split proportionately based on your consumption. The reality is that the media company just doesn't make enough money from that perspective. And if you want to read, like most people have a dynamic paywall, or a metered paywall where it's 3, 4, 5 articles before the paywall. Like if you're coming to my site and you're reading enough content to hit my paywall, it's time for you to pay, and you're going to pay for a subscription simply because you want more of it. And I have done enough to prove that my content's worth it.
And just final question, maybe that addresses it, but would that allow non-subscribers, would it still be valuable that non-subscribers buy the odd article here and there?
I mean, it could be, but again, you need to come up with a system that it works from both the economics perspective as well as the publishing perspective. Like from here, it gives Substack more control, right? Because instead of me controlling the money, Substack controls it, and then they fund my account at the end of the month. Versus right now, I control my Stripe account. The only real way that it works potentially is if it's baked into the browser. If like Google introduced, with Chrome, and they introduced a wallet, and they did this once, and it didn't work because no one actually wanted to do it. If they introduced a wallet of some sort, then maybe the microtransaction system would work. But otherwise, the only real way it works is if it is truly a centralized thing, like Twitch has. You can do microtransactions there, but then you are platform dependent, and none of us should be platform dependent.
100%. We are right at time. So, Jacob, first of all, I want to thank you for your generosity and your time.
Oh, thank you.
This was a blast. I have like a mountain of notes and other questions that I want to ask. Thank you, everybody who joined. What we're going to do is, and for the awesome questions, we are going to get a recording live. We'll email it out to everybody. And we will also create kind of some summary notes that you can skim and just, it'll be a nice digest of everything we talked about. So keep an eye open in the next day or two for the recording, and the notes will maybe follow in a week or two. But Jacob, thank you again. And thanks for everybody who tuned in.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. See everybody. Have a great rest of the day.